Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. Today's guest has been emceeing since the 80s, when I was a child. He popped in the early 90s with an album he did with the Bulldogs called Life of a Kid in the Ghetto. You might remember songs like I Gotta Have It.
I'm from Roxbury, the berry, but not the fruit, y'all. Don't make me act like where I come from, cause it's brute, so hold my bone in a zone that's new.
And he has continued a career that has helped to keep boom bap hip hop alive, working with folks like DJ Premier, Pete Rock, Master Ace, and so forth. And recently, in 2021, he dropped a self-titled collaboration album with Insight Innovates. So, for a conversation honoring the 50th anniversary of hip-hop, which is today, it just made all the sense to have this brother on the show. And we are so grateful to have a pioneer of hip-hop for Boston, Roxbury native and representer, Edo.G.
Peace.
Thank you so very much for coming through to The Common.
Peace. Thank you. I appreciate y'all having me.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Hip-hop, it started in New York City, in the Bronx in the 1970s. And from there, it just exploded to be one of the most influential and impactful cultural movements of the 20th century, right? And a lot of different cities and regions, hell, you could say the world at this point, right? A lot of different places helped make hip-hop what it is today. And I want to focus here in Boston. So, take us back to the days when hip-hop first took hold in this city.
I think the early days, it started, in the late 70s, going into the early 80s, right out of the disco era, with a lot of dancing. That was the first thing that kind of took hold of everybody was dance. And then popping came before breakdancing. And then b-boying kind of came into the play. And then from there, it was emceeing and rapping. And man, that's when it kind of all just culminated to one whole lifestyle called hip hop, and that's where I got in the early 80s, 81, 82 as a dancer, transitioning to a beatboxer and then to a rapper. MC, not a rapper. That was my transition. And in Boston in the early days, we had a lot of Black-owned clubs that were a catalyst in helping out the whole scene by letting us have talent shows, letting us do performances in their businesses. So I think the older generation, at first they was kind of against hip hop, but then they embraced it and, helped facilitate it here in the city.
So every region has its own style of hip hop. What does Boston hip hop sound like?
I think Boston has more of that traditional boom bap sound.
When we talk about boom bap, what is that?
Boom bap is that late 80s, early 90s sound. And it's really, hard drums, dope samples, dope rhymes. It can be hard, like Mobb Deep.
There's a war going on outside, no man is safe from. You could run, but you can't.
Or it could be, a little more fun, like De La Soul.
Keep us walking. De La Soul can help you breathe when you tread water.
But that's still boom bap. It has to do with that boom bap, boom bap.
Word. It sounds like hip hop, like it was in many places, an outlet for young people, right? What did it look like? What were people wearing? What was on the walls? Like, what would I see?
We were so close to New York, and that was like our big brother in hip hop. That's the father of it. So all of those styles kind of made its way here. But in Boston, we were big on Adidas. So those were the only sneakers that we were rocking, unless you were, a b-boy or something, and you were wearing Pumas with the fat laces, Lee jeans, shell toes. And we're actually doing a 50th anniversary down on the Rose Greenway, 50 years of Boston hip hop. And we have a lot of old photos from the 80s with, people, how they were dressing. So that's coming up the 19th of August, I think. And it's going to run for 2 months right in front of the big radio that Pro Black did with his daughter. So,
Yep.
Yep.
The mural from Pro Black. Shout out to him.
Yeah, no doubt.
So who were some of the names back in that day? Who were the folks that people were trying to be like,
Oh, man. I mean, the groups you had, the FTI crew, which was a group that I was in when I joined them when I was about 14, 15. You had, of course, the almighty RSO crew. You had the BK crew. You had the Roxbury Crush crew, Original Slaughter crew, RIP the Killer DJ. So we had a lot of groups back in the days, man, that were actually selling out, the Lee School, selling out these schools, because back in the days we did a lot of shows at schools, Chevu's as well. So, all of these groups, we were doing shows locally and selling them out. People were coming to see us.
So there was a momentum going on in the city with hip hop.
Yes, a big momentum.
So what happened to that momentum in the 90s during like the crack era, for example?
I think once, the 90s and late 80s, once crack kind of really infested the communities and the neighborhoods, it just brought a lot of violence. It brought a lot of different things that, we weren't doing in the 80s. It was more fun. In the 90s, Boston hip hop, we didn't even have any venues to perform in. A lot of the older venues that were owned by Black guys, they kind of sold them. And so it wasn't a good time in the 90s for hip hop in Boston. It was a good time to get record deals, but not as far as the city. It didn't change until around 97, 98, when the Middle East kind of opened its doors. And shout out to my man Pete from DIF Records. That was a local label back in the 90s, late 90s. He started doing shows at the Middle East, and that kind of opened the door for a new scene in Boston. So, and shout out to Cambridge for opening their doors.
It sounds like the late 80s, 90s, the whole crack era and stuff, like it was a big setback for the hip hop scene in Boston. I'm curious to know, how did that affect you? Because you were taking off in the early 90s, right?
Yeah, that was the crazy thing about it. I only did about 2 performances at the height in Boston. And I had a #1 record and top 10 records. We only performed here a couple of times in the 90s because there wasn't no venues.
Cause it takes progress. Life could be a cutthroat process. Part of the test, break goes.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more from Edo.G.
If you with it, nod yes, it's progress. Success just a one-step process. Part of the test.
Politics has never been stranger or more online, which is why the politics team at Wired is making a new show, Wired Politics Lab. It's all about how to navigate the endless stream of news and information and what to look out for. Each week on the show, we'll dig into far-right platforms, AI chatbots, influencer campaigns, and so much more. Wired Politics Lab launches Thursday, April 11th. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. Talk to me about the ripple effects that still remain from that time. Because if you couldn't get a show, if you could only perform twice in the city at a time when you were like popping, I feel like other artists who were trying to come up to get to where you were must have had an even worse time. And I would think that some of that can kind of explain why Boston is not among the cities at the forefront when we think about hip-hop influences and sounds and stuff,
Yeah, one of the main components that I've always had beef with Boston with is radio.
Mm.
You know, I mean, we've only had 2 black radio stations, legit radio stations. And, you know, shout out to all of the stations that's out there doing their thing online, some pirating, you know, still keeping it going. But every other city in the country supports their local artists. If they're popping, they got a record that's good, they playing it. We never had that real radio support.
How were people getting introduced to the new music from the scene here? You know, like who was the Stretch and Bobbito representing for Boston, you know?
Yeah, we did have, you know, college radio, WERS was definitely a catalyst throughout the whole 90s.
Emerson, okay.
I would say them. They really put the stamp because they had a huge antenna. So a lot of people tuned into that.
Yeah, the college radio I feel has done so much for hip hop, you know, particularly independent underground hip hop, you know. I'm curious to know if you were to make a newcomer's guide to hip hop in this city, where would you start people?
Oh man, we have such a rich, long, deep history going back to the 80s. From there, you know, you had The Source was started here. So it goes back. We've contributed, you know, a lot to hip hop, myself included, Made Men included.
Yo, I launch lyrics like missiles, fully armed like pistols, shells whistle. I'm trying to make
A bunch of other Massachusetts artists, because I'm not just talking about Boston, but, you know, you got artists from Lawrence, you know, you got that whole crew, Term and Rex and Static Selector and, you know, everybody from out there. My man Scientific, who was the original guy from Lawtown, RIP to him. And, you know, you got Joyner Lucas from Worcester, you got Bia.
I got enemies in my yard, I got Hennessy in my system, but I ride with faith in God, so I'm never gonna be a victim.
Those are some of the newer cats that's doing it right now. It just has to be shown. If you come through when you see the 50 years of hip hop, that would be the best starting point for somebody to come through, get here before October, before it's over.
Word. So August 19th, make sure you get down to that Rose Greenway.
Mm-hmm.
Word. Well, I want to know what's next for you. Tell us more about this album.
Yeah, it's called We Do Good. And if you read between the lines, it spells out Edo.G.
Nice.
I'm really excited about it. I produced about 60% of it myself too. Got a ton of projects that's coming out this year. My album, a bunch of collaborative projects. We got another album coming with my guy, Seventh Son, young up and coming sax player from Berkeley. So we did this joint called Boom Jazz, where it's boom bap mixed with jazz.
Right on, right on. Well, I want to know, what are your hopes for the future of hip hop in Boston? What is it you want to see?
You know, there's a bunch of unity amongst the older generation of hip hop, but I'd like to really connect all those dots with all of the, you know, younger cats and just kind of, you know, let everybody know we together in this thing. You know what I'm saying? I want unity. That's my main thing. Like, you know, supporting each other.
Edo, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so very much for coming through to The Common. We really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. Thank you. Thank you, man.
That's MC, Boston legend, Edo.G. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. Do you have a favorite Boston MC or Boston hip-hop song? Please hit us up on Instagram at WBUR The Common or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. And now it is that time for me to let you know that The Common is produced by Caitlin Harrop and Franny Monahan. It's mixed by Emily Jankowski, Matt Reed, and Paul Vaitkus. And it's edited by Samata Joshi and Ben Brock Johnson. And our theme music is Me by Hisu. And from the newsroom of WBUR, I'm your host, Daryl C. Murphy. I'll talk to you soon.